Rebecca Chen was 38 years old and worked as a corporate attorney in Seattle, Washington. 3 months ago, she came home from a business trip to find her wedding ring, the platinum band with the princess-cut diamond her husband spent 3 months' salary on, sitting in their kitchen trash can with a yellow sticky note attached that read, just 2 words, "Finally free." What she did next didn't just change everything, it destroyed him completely. And the beautiful part? He never saw it coming. Her husband Marcus thought he was so clever, thought he'd planned the perfect exit, thought he understood exactly who he was dealing with after 12 years of marriage. But what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Rebecca had been 10 steps ahead of him for months. And when she finally made her move, it wasn't just devastating, it was absolute. Before this story reveals exactly how Rebecca dismantled his entire world piece by piece, viewers should hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because trust me, they're going to want to hear every single detail of this story. Drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from? Because this story connects with people everywhere who've been betrayed by someone they trusted completely. Now let's go back to the beginning, because everyone needs to understand just how perfect everything seemed before it all fell apart. Rebecca met Marcus Donovan on a rainy October evening in 2011 at a charity gala in downtown Seattle. She was 26, fresh out of law school, working 70-hour weeks at Morrison & Associates, trying to make junior partner. She'd almost skipped the event. She was exhausted. Her feet hurt from a deposition that ran 4 hours late, and all she wanted was her couch and a glass of wine. But her senior partner insisted she attend, said it was good for networking. Marcus was standing by the silent auction tables, looking absolutely devastating in a charcoal grey suit, studying a bid sheet for a weekend in Napa Valley. He had this intensity about him, like he was calculating something important rather than just bidding on a vacation package. When Rebecca walked past, he looked up, and time actually seemed to stop. Dark eyes, strong jawline, this smile that was both confident and slightly uncertain at the same time. He asked if she was bidding on Napa. She laughed and said she couldn't afford Napa on a junior associate's salary, immediately regretting how honest that sounded. He suggested buying her a drink instead, calling it a much more affordable luxury experience. They spent the next 3 hours talking, standing in that same spot by the silent auction tables, like they'd created their own private universe in the middle of this crowded gala. She learned he was 31, a senior financial analyst at Clearwater Investments, passionate about sustainable energy portfolios and making finance work for environmental good rather than just profit. He was originally from Austin, Texas, had moved to Seattle 5 years ago for the job, and still missed proper Texas barbecue, something fierce. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he listened. Marcus had this way of really listening, where he'd lean in slightly, maintain eye contact like nothing else in the room mattered, and ask follow-up questions that showed he was actually processing what she said, rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. When she mentioned working 70-hour weeks, he didn't give the usual response about work-life balance or ask if she was making partner track. Instead, he asked if the work fulfilled her, if it was what she imagined when she decided to become a lawyer. No one had ever asked her that before. He asked about her ambitions, her thoughts on everything from recent Supreme Court decisions to the best Thai food in Seattle, to whether she preferred mountains or ocean. They debated corporate responsibility, discussed favorite books, argued playfully about whether coffee should be measured by precision or instinct. By the time the gala ended at 11, they'd barely noticed 3 hours had passed. Rebecca had given him her number and agreed to dinner that Friday, breaking her usual rule about not dating for at least a week after meeting someone. Their courtship was something out of a romance novel, the kind of relationship that makes your friends simultaneously happy for you and slightly jealous. Marcus wasn't just attentive, he was thoughtful in ways that made Rebecca's heart ache with how seen she felt. For their second date, he'd remembered she mentioned loving old bookstores during their first conversation, so he picked her up and took her to this tucked-away shop in Pioneer Square, a place she'd never heard of despite living in Seattle for 3 years. They spent hours browsing, pulling books off shelves and reading passages to each other, debating whether Hemingway's sparse style was genius or overrated, laughing at ridiculous romance novel covers. Before they left, he bought her something. A first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, the spine slightly worn, the pages yellowed with age, but the text still crisp and clear. As he handed her the wrapped package outside the store, he explained that she'd mentioned wanting to be a lawyer after reading this in 8th grade. He thought she should have a copy that honored both who she was then and who she'd become now. Rebecca actually cried. Right there on the street, tears streaming down her face, while this man she'd known for 1 week looked at her with such gentle understanding, it made her chest hurt. The romantic gestures didn't stop. He'd send flowers to her office, with notes that said things like, "Hope your deposition goes well. Remember, you're brilliant," or, "Can't stop thinking about you. Dinner tonight?" He learned she took her coffee with 2 sugars and oat milk, a specific request most people got wrong, and would show up at her office on particularly brutal mornings with exactly the right order from exactly the right cafe. He learned she loved hiking but hated camping, that her favorite movie was The Princess Bride. Even though she pretended to like serious foreign films to seem sophisticated, that she had an irrational fear of birds that came from being chased by a goose as a child. He remembered all of it, referenced these details in ways that made her feel truly known. Marcus fit into her life seamlessly, like a puzzle piece she hadn't realized was missing. He charmed her friends at dinner parties, making them laugh with Texas stories and asking thoughtful questions about their lives. He impressed her colleagues at firm events, discussing cases intelligently without ever mansplaining or dominating conversations. He even won over her mother, who had hated every previous boyfriend with a passion bordering on performance art. The first time Rebecca brought him home to meet her parents, she was terrified. Her mother, first-generation Chinese immigrant, traditionally skeptical of everyone, had a particular talent for finding fatal flaws in the men Rebecca dated. Too lazy, too arrogant, too American, not understanding family values. Rebecca had warned Marcus extensively, prepared him for interrogation-level questioning. Instead, he showed up with expensive tea from Chinatown, the good stuff her mother loved but considered too extravagant to buy for herself. He asked her about her immigration story, listened to her talk for 2 hours about leaving Guangzhou in the 1970s, escaping Cultural Revolution aftermath, building a life in a country where she barely spoke the language. He asked intelligent questions, showed genuine interest, and by the end of the evening, Rebecca's mother was teaching him basic Mandarin phrases and laughing at his terrible pronunciation. After he left, she turned to Rebecca and said in Mandarin, "This one is different. This one has a good heart." 6 months in, they took a trip to Vancouver for Rebecca's birthday, a long weekend in February, when Seattle's grey drizzle was getting particularly oppressive. They stayed at a hotel overlooking the harbor, spent their days exploring Granville Island and Stanley Park, eating dim sum in Chinatown that her mother would have approved of, drinking wine in cozy restaurants, while rain pattered against the windows. On their last day, they were walking through Stanley Park at sunset. The rain had stopped for the first time all weekend, leaving everything glistening and clean. They were on this bridge overlooking the water, watching seaplanes land in the harbor, and Marcus suddenly stopped walking. He turned to face Rebecca, took both her hands in his, and she remembered thinking how warm his hands were, despite the February cold. He didn't get down on one knee. He knew she'd find that too public, too performative, would be embarrassed by strangers staring. Instead, he just stood there, holding her hands, and told her he knew they hadn't been together long. 6 months wasn't much time by conventional standards, but he'd never been more certain of anything in his life than he was about her. She made him want to be better, not because she demanded it, but because she inspired it. She challenged him intellectually. She made him laugh. She called him on his nonsense. She supported his dreams while pursuing her own with this fierce determination he admired so much. He paused, and Rebecca could see his eyes getting wet, could feel her own throat getting tight. He said he didn't want to wait years to build a life with her when he already knew she was the one. He didn't want to follow some arbitrary timeline when he woke up every morning grateful she existed. So he was asking her now, here, with terrible timing and no proper planning, "Rebecca Chen, will you marry me?" He pulled out a small velvet box from his coat pocket, opened it to reveal the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. Princess-cut diamond, platinum band, delicate and elegant without being ostentatious. The setting was unique, modern but with vintage influences, strong but feminine. Later, he told her he'd spent 3 months working with a jeweler, designing something specifically for her, something that matched her personality, brilliant, classic with modern edges, understated elegance that revealed complexity on closer inspection. Rebecca said yes before he could finish asking, before he could say another word. She said yes and kissed him right there on that bridge, while a family of tourists from somewhere in Asia applauded and took their photo without asking. Their wedding was perfect. They got married in June 2012 at a small vineyard outside Seattle, intimate with just 80 guests. Close friends, family, the people who actually mattered, rather than some massive production for appearances. The day was gorgeous. Rare Seattle sunshine with temperatures in the mid-70s, not too hot, just perfect. Rebecca wore a simple ivory dress with lace sleeves that her mother had helped her choose. Elegant without being princessy, sophisticated without being cold. Marcus wore a charcoal suit with a pale blue tie that matched the bridesmaids' dresses. When Rebecca walked down the aisle toward him, her father's arm around hers, jazz quartet playing softly, Marcus's face just crumpled. He started crying before she was halfway there, these silent tears streaming down his face while he smiled this smile of pure joy. Their vows were traditional but personalized. When he promised to love her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, his voice cracked on, "As long as we both shall live." When Rebecca promised the same, she meant every single word, with every fiber of her being. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, who'd maintained stoic Chinese patriarch demeanor through everything from her grandmother's death to her sister's divorce, hugged Marcus afterward and whispered that he should buy them take care of his daughter. And Marcus promised, voice thick with emotion, "Always, I promise, always." The reception was beautiful. String lights over the vineyard, local wine flowing, dancing under the stars. Marcus's toast referenced their first meeting, how he'd almost skipped that charity gala, how he'd been studying the Napa auction bid sheet when Rebecca walked past and changed his entire life. He said he didn't win Napa that night, but he won something infinitely better. He won her. Everyone cried. Even the groomsmen who'd been making jokes all day got misty-eyed. The first 2 years of marriage were blissful in that consuming, all-encompassing way that makes you believe you've cracked some secret code to happiness. They bought a craftsman house in Queen Anne with a view of the Sound. Marcus would cook elaborate dinners on Friday nights. He'd discovered a passion for cooking and would spend hours perfecting recipes. Rebecca would come home to the smell of garlic and wine, jazz playing softly, candles lit on their dining table. They'd spend Saturdays hiking the Cascades, exploring new trails, taking hundreds of photos of mountains and waterfalls, and each other laughing in the wilderness. Sunday mornings were lazy, breakfast in bed, reading the New York Times together, making love with the windows open and the Seattle rain pattering against the glass. They talked about everything. Their fears, their dreams, their childhoods, their ambitions. Marcus supported Rebecca's career obsessively, celebrating every case she won, comforting her through every setback. When she made junior partner at 30, he threw her a surprise party and gave a toast about how he'd known from the moment he met her that she was destined for greatness. Rebecca thought she'd found forever. She thought she'd found a partner who would walk beside her through everything life threw at them. She thought she knew exactly who Marcus Donovan was, her husband, her best friend, her safe place in a complicated world. Looking back now, she can see how naive that was, how blind she was to what was already beginning to shift beneath the surface of their perfect life. The first change was so subtle, she almost missed it. It was August 2014, just after their second anniversary. Marcus started working late more frequently. Not every night, just 2 or 3 times a week instead of once a month. He'd text around 6 saying a deal was closing, or a client needed emergency analysis, and he wouldn't get home until 9 or 10. Rebecca didn't think much of it at first. She was working insane hours herself, pulling late nights for a massive corporate merger. They were both ambitious professionals. This was normal, she told herself. This was what successful couples did. They understood the demands of high-powered careers. But then she noticed he'd started showering immediately when he came home, every single time. Before, Marcus would collapse on the couch, kiss her hello, ask about her day. Now he'd walk straight to the bathroom, and she'd hear the water running for 15-20 minutes. When she asked about it once, he laughed and said he felt grimy from the office, needed to wash off the day. Reasonable explanation, totally logical. She dismissed the tiny whisper of unease in her gut. The second incident happened in October. Rebecca had come home early from work, a deposition settled unexpectedly, and decided to surprise Marcus with his favorite takeout from that Thai place in Fremont. When she walked into their home office where he was working, he slammed his laptop closed so fast she actually jumped. He said she'd scared him, hand on his chest, breathing hard. She apologized, holding up the takeout bags, saying she'd brought dinner. He said she was home early. It wasn't a question, more like an observation tinged with something she couldn't quite identify. Annoyance, anxiety. She asked if it was a good surprise or bad surprise, trying to keep her tone light even as that whisper of unease got slightly louder. He said, "Good, of course," but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He explained there was work stuff on the screen he couldn't really share. Client confidentiality, the usual. Rebecca knew exactly how it was. She dealt with confidential information daily. The explanation made perfect sense. So why did she feel like she'd interrupted something she wasn't supposed to see? By December, Rebecca noticed Marcus was on his phone constantly, texting during dinner, smiling at messages in ways that seemed too intimate for work communication. When she'd ask who he was talking to, he'd say just Kelvin from the office, or client stuff or group chat with the guys. She started paying closer attention. He'd angled his phone away from her when messages came in. He'd set it face down on surfaces. He'd changed his passcode, something they'd always shared before because they trusted each other completely. When she mentioned this casually, asking if he remembered what it was because she needed to check something, he said he'd had to change it for work security protocols. Again, reasonable. Again, logical. Again, that whisper getting incrementally louder. Rebecca's best friend Rachel noticed before she fully acknowledged it. They were having lunch in January 2015, and Rebecca was telling her about their New Year's Eve plans, how Marcus had seemed distracted during dinner, checking his phone every few minutes. Rachel asked carefully if everything was okay with them. Rebecca said of course, automatically, asking why she would ask that. Rachel mentioned that Rebecca had brought up Marcus being distant like 4 times in the past month. The phone thing, the late nights, the shower thing was actually kind of weird when you thought about it. Rebecca defended immediately, saying he was just stressed with work. She was stressed too. It was a busy season for both of them. Rachel looked at her with this expression of concern and pity that made Rebecca's stomach clench. She just said to be aware, okay? She loved Rebecca, and she loved Marcus, but just keep your eyes open. Rebecca was almost angry with her. How dare she suggest something was wrong with the marriage? Marcus and Rebecca were solid. They were partners. They'd built something real and lasting. Rachel was being paranoid, projecting her own relationship issues onto theirs. But that night, Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about her words. She found herself watching Marcus more carefully. The way he'd smile at his phone. The way he'd suddenly started going to the gym 4 mornings a week when he'd barely exercised before. The way he'd bought new cologne. Something expensive and sophisticated, different from what he usually wore. The way he'd stopped initiating sex. They'd gone from 3 or 4 times a week to maybe once every 10 days. When they did make love, he seemed distant, distracted, like he was going through motions rather than connecting with her. In February, Rebecca's mother came for dinner. She had this uncanny ability to read people. Decades of being an immigrant, navigating American culture, while maintaining her Chinese roots, had given her sharp instincts about human behavior. Halfway through the evening, Marcus excused himself to take a call from the office, stepping onto their back patio in the rain for 15 minutes. After he left the room, Rebecca's mother leaned across the table and said in Mandarin that something was wrong with her husband. Rebecca started to protest, but her mother cut her off firmly. "A woman knows," she said. "He doesn't look at you the same way. He's hiding something. Be careful, Rebecca. Protect yourself." Rebecca laughed it off, told her she was reading too much into normal work stress, but her mother's words burrowed into her brain alongside Rachel's warning. By March, Rebecca couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Marcus was working late 4 nights a week now. His phone was basically glued to his hand. He'd started wearing nicer clothes to the office. New suits, expensive shoes, that cologne that smelled nothing like the man she'd married. He'd joke about needing to look sharp for client meetings, about the competitive nature of finance requiring a certain presentation. But the real shift was in how he looked at her. Or rather, how he didn't. They could sit across from each other at dinner, and his eyes would slide right past hers. The warmth, the intimacy, the spark that had always existed between them, it was fading like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Still, Rebecca held on to hope. She told herself this was normal. All marriages went through rough patches. They were just in a difficult season. Things would get better once his big project finished, once her merger case settled, once they had time to reconnect. She thought she still knew her husband. She thought whatever was happening, they could fix it together. Little did she know, there was nothing left to fix. Marcus had already made his choice, and Rebecca was about to discover just how thoroughly he'd betrayed everything they'd built together. The first major incident happened on a Friday night in late March. Rebecca had taken the afternoon off to surprise Marcus with a weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands. Something spontaneous to rekindle the romance they seemed to be losing. She'd booked a bed and breakfast, packed their bags, planned everything. She came home at 4 instead of 7, excited to surprise him, walking into their house with this hopeful energy she'd been missing for months. The house was empty. Marcus wasn't home yet, which was fine. She'd call him, tell him to come home. They'd leave immediately. She went upstairs to add a few things to his bag, and that's when she saw it. On his nightstand, partially hidden under a magazine, a receipt from a jewelry store downtown. Dated 2 days ago. For a women's necklace. 14-karat gold with a sapphire pendant. $2,300. Rebecca's heart stopped. Their anniversary wasn't for months. Her birthday had passed in December with just a card and dinner. There was no occasion, no reason for Marcus to buy expensive jewelry, unless it wasn't for her. She stood there holding that receipt, her hands actually shaking, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe it was for his mother, but her birthday wasn't until August. Maybe it was an early anniversary gift. But Marcus had never bought gifts more than a week in advance. When he came home at 6:30, Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table with the receipt in front of her. He greeted her casually, kissing the top of her head like everything was normal. Then he saw the receipt. The color drained from his face. She asked what it was, her voice surprisingly steady, considering her insides were dissolving. He said he could explain. She told him to please do. He said it was for Sarah's birthday. Rebecca knew Sarah, his colleague. She'd been really helpful with the Henderson account, and they did a team gift, and he volunteered to pick it up. Everyone chipped in. The lie came out smooth, practiced, like he'd prepared for this conversation. Rebecca asked if the whole team contributed $2,000 for a colleague's birthday. He clarified that like 10 of them pitched in. It was a nice department, they did things like that. She asked to see the card from everyone. He looked confused, asking what she meant. She clarified, the card from the whole team, for Sarah's birthday. His jaw clenched. He asked if she was seriously interrogating him right now. He was telling her what it was. Did she not trust him? And there it was, the classic manipulation, turning her legitimate question into an attack on her character, making her the bad guy for asking about a $2,000 jewelry receipt she found hidden in their bedroom. She said she just wanted to understand. He said there was nothing to understand. He bought a gift for a colleague. That's it. He was sorry if that somehow offended her, but he couldn't have her monitoring every purchase he made like he was some kind of criminal. He stormed upstairs. Rebecca sat at that table for an hour, the receipt still in her hand, knowing with absolute certainty that he was lying but having no proof beyond her gut. The psychological manipulation intensified after that night. Marcus became a master at gaslighting. When Rebecca would mention he was working late again, he'd say he told her about the Yamamoto deal last week. Wasn't she listening? Even though he'd never mentioned it, when she'd point out he was on his phone constantly, he'd respond that she was imagining things. He barely used it, right after she'd watched him text for 20 minutes straight. He'd make her feel crazy, paranoid, like she was the problem, not him. Like her suspicions were character flaws rather than rational responses to his obvious deception. The second major incident came in April. Rebecca had been working from home because of a migraine, and around 2 in the afternoon, she heard Marcus's voice downstairs. He'd told her that morning he had meetings all day, wouldn't be home until dinner, but there he was, and he wasn't alone. She heard a woman's laugh, high, melodic, intimate. Rebecca stood at the top of their stairs, listening. The woman said he was terrible, her voice playful, affectionate. Marcus replied that she loved it, and the tone, God, the tone was so familiar, because it was the same way he used to talk to Rebecca in their early days. Rebecca started walking down, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might vomit. She got halfway down before they heard her, and she watched Marcus's face go through this rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise, panic, then forced casualness. He exclaimed that Rebecca was home, sounding shocked. He was standing in their living room with a woman Rebecca had never seen before. She was maybe 28, blonde, wearing a fitted black dress and heels that were absolutely not appropriate for a work meeting. Beautiful in that effortless way that made Rebecca's stomach turn. Rebecca said coldly that she lived there, asking who this was. Marcus introduced her as Amanda Chen, no relation, making a joke that fell flat. She was a new analyst at Clearwater. He was just showing her some files he needed to grab from home. He then introduced Rebecca as his wife. Amanda extended her hand with this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, saying it was so nice to meet her. Marcus talked about Rebecca all the time. Rebecca shook her hand, noting the expensive manicure, the designer handbag, the way she stood just slightly too close to Marcus in Rebecca's living room. Rebecca said she wasn't aware he was bringing colleagues home. Marcus said it was last minute. The files were here. Amanda needed them. He said he'd grab them during lunch. No big deal, but it was a big deal. The way they stood together. The way he'd said, "You're terrible," in that intimate tone. The way Amanda had looked at him before they realized Rebecca was there, like she knew him in ways that went far beyond professional. They left within 5 minutes, Marcus kissing Rebecca's cheek and promising to be home by 6. She watched from their window as they walked to their separate cars, saw him touch her lower back briefly before they separated. Rebecca couldn't breathe, literally could not catch her breath. She sat on their couch, the same couch where they'd spent countless Sunday mornings, where he'd proposed doing a practice run before Vancouver, where they'd planned their future. And she knew. She absolutely knew. The third and worst incident came 3 weeks later. Marcus had been gone on a business trip to San Francisco for 4 days. He'd been vague about details, said it was client meetings and strategy sessions, would be too busy to talk much. Rebecca had flown to Portland for a deposition that finished early. Her flight back landed at SeaTac at 9 p.m. on Thursday, a full day before Marcus was supposed to return. She decided to surprise him by being home when he got back Friday night, maybe cook his favorite meal, try one more time to reconnect. But when she got home at 10 p.m., his car was in the driveway. The lights were on. Music was playing. The jazz he loved. The same playlist from their early dating days. Rebecca walked into her own house like a stranger, her suitcase still in hand. The living room was empty, but she heard voices upstairs, in their bedroom. Her legs moved on autopilot, carrying her up those stairs, even though part of her wanted to run. She stood outside their bedroom door, listening. Marcus was saying he couldn't keep doing this. It was getting too complicated. That was Amanda's voice responding. She told him to leave Rebecca then. He said he was going to. He said he was done. Marcus said it wasn't that simple. The house, the assets, her family. It was complicated. Amanda said he was stalling. He'd said 6 months ago he'd tell Rebecca. 6 months ago. They'd been together for at least 6 months. Rebecca's migraine day hadn't been their first time in the house. This had been going on through Christmas, through New Year's, through her birthday, through their anniversary. If this resonates with viewers, if anyone's ever felt that moment when your entire world crystallizes into painful clarity, they should hit that like button and subscribe. Because what Rebecca did next, what she discovered, what she planned, everyone needs to hear all of it. Rebecca didn't burst into the room. She didn't scream or cry or confront. Instead, she backed away, silently, walked downstairs, got in her car, and drove to a hotel downtown. Because in that moment, standing outside her bedroom door listening to her husband and his mistress discuss the complications of leaving her, something shifted. The heartbreak, the devastation, the humiliation. They were all there, burning through her like acid. But underneath, something else was emerging. Something cold and calculating and absolutely ruthless. Marcus thought Rebecca was weak. Thought she'd cry and beg and make it easy for him to be the victim. Thought he could discard her like trash, move on to his younger, prettier replacement, and she'd just accept it. He had no idea who he was actually dealing with. Rebecca was a corporate attorney. She negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. She found weaknesses in contracts that seasoned lawyers missed. She built cases that were absolutely airtight. And she was about to build a case against her husband that would destroy him completely. Rebecca didn't go home that night. She checked into the Four Seasons downtown, ordered room service she couldn't eat, and sat on the bed staring at the city lights, her mind working through everything she'd ignored for the past year. The specific moment of full realization came around 2 a.m. when she was reviewing everything chronologically. The late nights had started August 2014. The jewelry receipt was dated March 2015. Amanda had said 6 months ago, which put their relationship beginning around November 2014. But something didn't add up. The changes in Marcus had started before Amanda, the showering immediately when he came home, the phone privacy, the emotional distance. Amanda wasn't the beginning. She was just the current version. Rebecca grabbed her laptop and did something she'd never done before. She logged into their cell phone account. Marcus and she shared a family plan, and as the primary account holder, she had access to detailed billing records. She pulled up his text message logs from the past year. Thousands of messages to a number she didn't recognize, starting in August 2014. Hundreds of calls, many lasting over an hour, almost all late at night or during his work trips. That number wasn't Amanda's. Rebecca had seen her contact info when they'd exchanged a glance at their phones in the living room. This was someone else. She ran the number through a reverse lookup service. The name that came back made her physically nauseous. Jessica Reeves. Rebecca Googled her. Financial analyst at Marcus's company. 32 years old. Brunette. Beautiful. Her LinkedIn showed she'd started at Clearwater Investments in August 2014. Not Amanda. Jessica. Or maybe both. Maybe there were more. Rebecca spent the next 6 hours systematically gathering evidence. She accessed their credit card statements going back 2 years, hotel rooms in Seattle charged during late work nights, dinners at expensive restaurants on nights Marcus said he was eating at his desk, charges at jewelry stores, lingerie boutiques, flower shops. Their joint checking account showed cash withdrawals of $500 to $1,000 3 or 4 times a month, always from an ATM near his office. Untraceable. Spending. She found a charge for a storage unit rental starting in January 2015. Marcus had never mentioned a storage unit. They didn't need one. Their house had plenty of space. At 7 a.m., Rebecca called in sick to work. First time in 5 years. Then she drove to the storage facility, a generic-looking place in Renton. She didn't have a key, but she had her attorney voice and a story about her husband accidentally leaving some work files in his unit. The manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s, took pity on her. He mentioned Unit 237, 3rd building, 2nd floor, and said he'd walk her over since they couldn't let anyone in without authorization. Rebecca said smoothly that her name should be on the account. Rebecca Donovan. He checked. It wasn't. Only Marcus's name. But the manager was already walking toward Building 3, and Rebecca followed. He unlocked Unit 237, and what Rebecca saw inside made the entire previous year make perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't files, it was a furnished studio apartment. Small fridge stocked with wine and beer, a mattress with high-end bedding, a clothing rack with men's clothes, including a suit she'd never seen Marcus wear, a shelf with framed photos, and when she stepped closer, they were all of Marcus with different women. Jessica Reeves at a beach, Amanda Chen at a restaurant, a redhead she didn't recognize at what looked like a concert. There was a locked filing cabinet. The manager had wandered back to his office, trusting her now. Rebecca wasn't proud of what she did next, but she used a letter opener from the desk, because yes, there was a whole office set up in this sick little hideaway, and pried open the lock. Inside were files, multiple files, each labeled with a woman's name and a date range. Jessica Reeves, Aug 2014, Feb 2015. Amanda Chen, Nov 2014, present. The redhead, Victoria Mills, June 2014, Dec 2014. Inside each file were copies of texts, emails, photos, and handwritten notes in Marcus's writing, detailing what he'd told each woman, what lies worked, what didn't. Like he was running scientific experiments on human emotions. There was a file labeled Rebecca, too. Her stomach turned as she opened it. It contained their wedding photos, their anniversary cards, printouts of her work schedule, notes about her travel plans, her friendships, her family dynamics, information he'd gathered not because he loved her, but because he was monitoring her to ensure his other relationships stayed hidden. At the bottom of that filing cabinet was a document that made Rebecca's blood run ice cold. Divorce papers. Already filled out. Already dated for next month. Citing irreconcilable differences, requesting split assets 50-50, despite the fact that Rebecca had contributed 70% of their home down payment and earned more throughout their marriage. And there was something else, a prenuptial agreement she'd never seen before, backdated to before their wedding, with what appeared to be her signature. Except Rebecca had never signed a prenup. They'd never had one. Marcus was planning to forge legal documents to protect himself in the divorce he was planning without her knowledge. The full truth crashed over Rebecca like a building collapse. Her husband wasn't just having an affair. He was a serial cheater who'd been deceiving multiple women simultaneously for years. He was running a secret apartment where he lived a separate life. He was documenting his manipulations like case studies, and he was preparing to divorce her while committing document fraud to steal her assets. Rebecca stood in that storage unit, surrounded by evidence of her husband's systematic sociopathy, and she felt something she'd never experienced before. Not just heartbreak, not just betrayal, but a cold, crystalline fury that felt like power rather than pain. She took out her phone and photographed everything, every file, every page, every photo, every forged document. She spent 3 hours in that unit, documenting absolutely everything with the thoroughness she used for corporate depositions. Then she left everything exactly as she'd found it. Locked the unit, thanked the manager, got in her car, and she started planning her husband's complete and total destruction. Rebecca didn't go home for 3 days. She called Marcus once, kept her voice normal, said the Portland deposition had complications, and she needed to stay longer. He sounded almost relieved, said he'd just gotten back from San Francisco early and was catching up on work. The lies flowed from him so effortlessly, it was like breathing. Rebecca stayed in that hotel room and built her case. As a corporate attorney, she knew exactly what evidence she needed and how to get it legally. Everything she'd photographed in the storage unit was discoverable. She was his wife, and those were marital assets in a unit he'd rented with joint funds. Admissible in court. But she wanted more than a divorce. She wanted justice. Real justice. She started with a call to her friend Lindsay, who worked in private investigation. Rebecca told her she needed surveillance on her husband, her voice steady, despite the surreal nature of the words. Lindsay said she was so sorry, her voice gentle with immediate understanding of what this meant. Rebecca told her not to be sorry, just be thorough. Lindsay put her in touch with Marcus Thornton, ironically also named Marcus, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. Within 24 hours, he had surveillance on her husband. Within 48 hours, he'd confirmed Marcus was indeed juggling multiple relationships, rotating between their house, Amanda's apartment, and the storage unit. Next, Rebecca contacted the best divorce attorney in Seattle, Patricia Morrison, the senior partner at the firm where Rebecca had started her career. She made an appointment using her maiden name, Chen, so Marcus wouldn't get any alerts if someone at his company knew she was consulting divorce lawyers. Patricia listened to the story, reviewed the evidence on Rebecca's laptop, and smiled. Actually smiled. She said this was the most well-documented case of infidelity and financial impropriety she'd seen in 30 years. With this evidence, they could absolutely destroy him in court. But she assumed Rebecca wanted more than just a favorable divorce settlement. Rebecca said she wanted everything. She wanted him financially ruined. She wanted him publicly humiliated. She wanted him to lose everything he valued, his reputation, his career, his freedom to ever do this to anyone else. Patricia leaned back in her chair and said, then they needed to be strategic. They needed allies. And they needed perfect timing. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca secretly gathered those allies. She contacted HR at Clearwater Investments with copies of the storage unit files, showing Marcus was having affairs with multiple colleagues, creating hostile work environment issues. She contacted the Washington State Bar Association about the forged prenuptial agreement. Document fraud was a serious crime. And while Rebecca wasn't a criminal attorney, she knew people who were. She met with a forensic accountant who discovered Marcus had been siphoning money from their joint accounts into a secret account in the Cayman Islands, $15,000 over the past 18 months. Financial fraud in a marriage was grounds for criminal charges, not just civil penalties. Rebecca found the jeweler who'd sold him the sapphire necklace. She showed him photos of Amanda, Jessica, and Victoria. He identified all three as women Marcus had brought into the store at different times, buying them all expensive jewelry, always paying cash so it wouldn't show on credit cards. Every piece of evidence she gathered, she documented meticulously. Dates, times, witnesses, receipts, photographs, testimony. She built the case against her husband the way she'd built cases for clients, airtight, comprehensive, devastating. but she still needed the perfect moment for the confrontation. It couldn't be private. Private allowed him to manipulate, to gaslight, to spin the narrative. It needed to be public. It needed witnesses. It needed authority figures who could validate what she was saying and ensure consequences. The opportunity came in mid-May when Marcus told Rebecca about the annual Clearwater Investments Company Gala, a formal event at the Four Seasons where the firm celebrated the year's successes. Partners, board members, executives, everyone who mattered in Marcus's professional world would be there. He mentioned it was black tie and actually seemed excited. He asked if she'd come, saying it was important for his career. Rebecca smiled and said of course. She wouldn't miss it. What Marcus didn't know was that Rebecca had already contacted the VP of Human Resources at Clearwater. She'd already sent her the documentation from the storage unit. She'd already arranged for her, along with a member of the board of directors and the company's legal counsel, to be present at the gala with full knowledge of what Rebecca was planning. Rebecca had also contacted Amanda Chen and Jessica Reeves directly, using anonymous emails from accounts she'd set up, sending them each evidence that Marcus was juggling multiple relationships, telling them both to attend the gala if they wanted the truth. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. And in 3 days, at the Clearwater Investments annual gala, in front of everyone who mattered in Marcus Donovan's professional and social world, Rebecca was going to reveal exactly who he really was. He thought he'd outmaneuvered her, thought he was 10 steps ahead, planning his exit, protecting his assets, moving on to his next victims. But Rebecca had been 20 steps ahead of him since the moment she found that jewelry receipt, and what was coming wasn't just revenge, it was complete and total annihilation. The night of the gala, Rebecca spent 2 hours getting ready. She wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that Marcus had never seen before. She'd bought it specifically for this occasion. She styled her hair in an elegant updo, wore the diamond earrings her mother had given her for her wedding, and put on makeup with the precision of a warrior preparing for battle. When Marcus saw her walking down their stairs, he actually stopped mid-sentence of whatever he was saying on the phone. For a moment, Rebecca saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or recognition of what he was losing. But it passed quickly, replaced by his usual charming smile. He said she looked absolutely stunning, kissing her cheek like they were a normal, happy couple. Rebecca thanked him, her voice warm and genuine sounding. Years of depositions had taught her how to lie convincingly when necessary. She told him he looked handsome too. They drove to the Four Seasons in his car, making small talk about work and weather. He had no idea that in her elegant clutch purse, Rebecca had a USB drive containing every piece of evidence she'd gathered. He had no idea that several people at this gala were waiting for a signal from her to begin coordinating his professional destruction. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, white orchid centerpieces, a string quartet playing softly. 300 people from Clearwater Investments and their partners, all dressed in their finest, champagne flowing, conversations buzzing with that particular energy of corporate celebration. Rebecca spotted Amanda Chen immediately. She wore a red dress standing near the bar, her eyes following Marcus across the room. Rebecca saw Jessica Reeves too, despite the relationship supposedly being over. She was in midnight blue, watching from near the silent auction tables. Neither of them knew the other was there. Neither of them knew what was about to happen. Marcus worked the room like the consummate professional, introducing Rebecca to colleagues, laughing at jokes, completely in his element, his hand on her lower back, calling her sweetheart, presenting them as the perfect couple. The performance was Oscar-worthy. At 8 p.m., the company president, Michael Sanderson, took the stage for the formal program. Awards were given, speeches made, achievements celebrated. Marcus received recognition for his work on the Yamamoto account, the same account he'd used as an excuse for countless late nights. Then, as the formal program concluded and people began moving toward dinner tables, Rebecca saw her signal. Elizabeth Chen, The VP of Human Resources made eye contact from across the room and nodded slightly. It was time. Rebecca excused herself from Marcus, telling him she needed the restroom. Instead, she walked to the small staging area where Elizabeth waited with David Park, a board member, and Catherine Reeves, the company's chief legal counsel. Elizabeth asked quietly if Rebecca was absolutely certain she wanted to do this. Once this started, there was no going back. Rebecca said she'd never been more certain of anything in her life, and she meant it. Catherine handed her a microphone and said the room was hers. Rebecca walked onto the small stage, her emerald dress catching the light, and tapped the microphone twice. The conversations gradually quieted as people turned to look, confused about why someone other than company leadership was on stage. She said good evening, her voice calm and clear, carrying across the ballroom. For those who didn't know her, her name was Rebecca Chen Donovan. She was Marcus Donovan's wife. Marcus's face went white. He was frozen at a table 20 feet away, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. Rebecca apologized for interrupting the beautiful evening, but she had some information that the board of directors and leadership of Clearwater Investments needed to hear, and frankly, she thought all of them deserved to know what kind of person they'd been working alongside. Marcus called out, his voice strained, trying to maintain control, asking what she was doing. He said this wasn't appropriate. Rebecca said what wasn't appropriate was conducting multiple simultaneous affairs with colleagues while married. What wasn't appropriate was renting a secret apartment to facilitate deception. What wasn't appropriate was forging legal documents to commit fraud. Should she continue? The room was dead silent. 300 people, not one of them breathing audibly. Rebecca nodded to the AV team, whom she'd briefed earlier, and images began projecting on the large screens flanking the stage. Photos of the storage unit, photos of Marcus with Amanda, with Jessica, with Victoria, copies of his meticulous files documenting his manipulation tactics. She explained that Marcus Donovan had been systematically deceiving not just her, his wife, but multiple women in this room and in this company. He'd been using company resources and work trips to facilitate his activities. He'd created what amounts to a manual for emotional manipulation and fraud. Amanda Chen was crying, her hand over her mouth. Jessica Reeves had gone completely pale. Around the room, people were whispering, staring at Marcus with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Rebecca continued, saying it got worse. Marcus had also been committing financial fraud, including forging a prenuptial agreement with her signature, a signature she never provided, and siphoning marital funds into offshore accounts. These weren't just moral failures. These were crimes. David Park stood up from his table, asking Marcus if this was true. Marcus's face had gone from white to red, his jaw clenched. He said this was slander. This was his wife having some kind of breakdown. Rebecca interrupted, saying this was documented evidence, holding up the USB drive, all of which had been provided to their HR department, their legal counsel, and the Washington State Bar Association, all of which was admissible in court, all of which would be used in the criminal and civil proceedings that began Monday morning. Elizabeth Chen stood addressing the room. She said Clearwater Investments took allegations of this nature extremely seriously. As of this moment, Marcus Donovan was suspended pending a full investigation. Security would escort him from the premises. 2 security guards appeared from the sides of the ballroom, moving toward Marcus. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She looked directly at her husband. This man she'd loved for 12 years. This man who destroyed that love with calculated cruelty. She said he threw her wedding ring in the trash with a note that said, "Finally free." What he didn't know was that she'd already been free of him for weeks. She'd already gathered everything she needed to destroy him. She'd already won. He just didn't know the game was over. Marcus tried to speak, but nothing came out. The security guards reached him, and as they escorted him toward the exit, he finally found words. He said she'd regret this. He'd ruin her. Rebecca smiled. Actually smiled. She said he couldn't ruin someone who's already 20 steps ahead of him. She was a corporate attorney. This was what she did. She won cases. And she just won the most important case of her life. As security led him out, the room remained in stunned silence. Then, impossibly, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then a wave of applause spread through the ballroom. Not everyone, but enough. Women who'd likely experienced their own versions of betrayal. People who respected the courage it took to expose truth publicly. Catherine Reeves approached the stage. On behalf of Clearwater Investments, she wanted to apologize for the environment that allowed this behavior to occur unchecked. They would be conducting a thorough review of their policies and procedures. Rebecca said she appreciated that and hoped this served as a wake-up call about accountability. She left the stage, handed the USB drive to Elizabeth Chen, and walked out of that ballroom with her head high and her dignity intact. In the parking lot, Rebecca finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd just done. She sat in her car and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. From the release of carrying secrets and pain for so long. From the justice of finally making him face consequences. The legal outcome was swift and comprehensive. By Monday morning, Clearwater Investments had terminated Marcus for violations of their ethics policies, harassment of colleagues, and misuse of company resources. His professional reputation in Seattle's financial sector was obliterated. The gala confrontation had been witnessed by representatives from every major firm in the city. Patricia Morrison filed divorce papers that same day. With the evidence they'd compiled, Marcus's attorney advised him not to contest. The settlement gave Rebecca the house, 70% of their joint assets, full recovery of the $15,000 he'd embezzled to the Cayman Islands account, and reimbursement for the money he'd spent on his affairs from their joint accounts. The forged prenuptial agreement resulted in criminal charges. Marcus pled guilty to document fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, permanent notation on his record that would prevent him from ever working in financial services again. The Washington State Bar Association investigated whether he'd attempted to use forged legal documents in ways that constituted practicing law without a license. While they didn't pursue charges, the investigation became part of his permanent record, further destroying his credibility. But the financial justice went beyond the divorce settlement. Amanda Chen filed a civil suit against Marcus for fraud and emotional distress. Jessica Reeves did the same. Victoria Mills, the woman Rebecca had seen in the storage unit photos, came forward with her own story and her own lawsuit. Combined, those 3 civil suits cost Marcus an additional $120,000 in settlements and legal fees. The Cayman Islands account was frozen, and the funds returned as part of restitution. Every penny he'd tried to hide, every dollar he'd spent on his deceptions, came back to haunt him. Within 3 months, Marcus Donovan went from being a rising star at a prestigious investment firm to being unemployable, legally compromised, and financially devastated. He lost his career. He lost his money. He lost his reputation. He lost everything he'd valued more than their marriage. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the social fallout. The gala confrontation became legendary in Seattle's professional circles. People talked about it for months. Marcus couldn't show his face at any networking event, any professional gathering, any social function, without becoming the subject of whispers and stares. Amanda Chen transferred to a Clearwater office in Boston, starting over where people didn't know her as one of Marcus Donovan's victims. Jessica Reeves left finance entirely, going back to school for a psychology degree. Rebecca hoped they both found healing and happiness away from the wreckage Marcus had created. As for Rebecca, she'd already been making junior partner before all this happened, but the clarity and strength she showed throughout the divorce actually elevated her standing at Morrison & Associates. Patricia Morrison became a mentor, guiding her toward making senior partner within 2 years. Rebecca kept the house in Queen Anne. At first, she thought she'd sell it, too many memories. But then she decided no, Marcus didn't get to take her home too. Instead, she remodeled, repainted, changed the furniture, made it hers rather than theirs. The bedroom where she'd heard him with Amanda became her home office. The kitchen where they'd cooked together became her sanctuary for cooking meals for friends. She started hiking again on weekends, reclaiming the trails they'd explored together, making new memories that erased the old ones. She traveled, Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, places she'd always wanted to visit, but Marcus said were too touristy or not worth the expense. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Rebecca adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix named Justice, slightly on the nose, but the irony made her smile. Justice became her constant companion, greeting her when she came home, sleeping at the foot of her bed, reminding her that loyalty and unconditional love still existed in the world. Her mother called every Sunday, like clockwork. She'd say she told Rebecca something was wrong, but always with love rather than judgment. She was proud of Rebecca for being strong. Rachel, her best friend who'd warned her early on, became even closer. She told Rebecca over wine one evening that she was a warrior. She didn't just survive this, she won. And Rebecca did win. Not just in court, not just financially, but emotionally. She took back control of her narrative. She refused to be cast as the victim in someone else's story. She stood up, fought back, and made sure that the person who'd hurt her faced real, meaningful consequences. The social consequences extended beyond just Marcus. Clearwater Investments implemented new policies about workplace relationships, mandatory ethics training, and stricter oversight of employee conduct. Rebecca's case became a catalyst for change, imperfect but real. Marcus tried to contact her once, about 8 months after everything concluded. A long email asking for closure, wanting to explain, seeking forgiveness. Rebecca deleted it without reading beyond the first line. He'd had his chance to explain, 12 years of chances. She didn't owe him anything, least of all her attention. Looking back now, almost a year since Rebecca found her wedding ring in the trash, she can see the journey clearly. The pain was real, devastating, world-shattering, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about trust and love and partnership. There were nights she couldn't sleep, replaying every moment of their 12 years together, analyzing every conversation for signs she'd missed, torturing herself with questions that had no satisfying answers. Why wasn't she enough? What did those other women have that she didn't? How could someone look into your eyes, say they love you, make promises about forever, and simultaneously be planning your destruction? These questions haunted her for months. But the lessons were even more real, even more valuable than the pain was destructive. She learned that her instincts deserved to be trusted, that the quiet voice of intuition isn't paranoia or insecurity, but wisdom trying to protect you. All those months when she rationalized Marcus's behavior, dismissed the red flags, talked herself out of her suspicions, told herself she was being crazy or controlling or insecure, her gut knew. Her instincts were screaming the truth, while her heart wanted to believe the lies. Now Rebecca listens to that inner voice. She honors it. She trusts herself in ways she never did before. When something feels wrong, she doesn't immediately search for explanations that make it okay. She sits with the discomfort and investigates rather than dismisses. She learned that strength isn't just about getting through something, it's about how you get through it. The choices you make when you're in pain. The person you decide to be when someone else decides to be terrible. Rebecca could have confronted Marcus privately, accepted a quiet divorce, taken whatever settlement he offered to make it end quickly, and spare herself the public nature of what happened at that gala. Instead, she chose the harder path. She chose documentation, evidence, public exposure, complete accountability. That choice was powerful. That choice was agency. That choice meant she refused to protect someone who hadn't protected her, refused to shield someone from consequences they'd earned through their own actions. Rebecca learned that justice matters. Not revenge, justice. There's a fundamental difference that people often miss. Revenge would have been trying to hurt Marcus just to hurt him, making him suffer for her own satisfaction, acting from spite or bitterness. Justice was ensuring he faced appropriate consequences for his actions. Consequences that might prevent him from doing this to other women. Consequences that might inspire other people being deceived to stand up for themselves. Consequences that restored some balance to a situation that had been grotesquely unbalanced. Justice meant Amanda, Jessica, and Victoria got validation and restitution. Justice meant Clearwater Investments implemented policies that might protect future employees. Justice meant Marcus's ability to harm others was diminished. That wasn't about revenge. That was about making the world slightly safer for the next person who might have crossed his path. The healing journey hasn't been linear. Some days Rebecca is fine, strong and confident and grateful for the new life she's built. Grateful even for the experience because of how much she's grown through it. She wakes up in her remodeled house with Justice the dog sleeping at her feet, makes her coffee exactly how she likes it without considering anyone else's preferences, plans her day around her own priorities and desires. Other days she still grieves. She grieves the 12 years she gave to someone who didn't deserve them. She grieves the future she thought they'd have, the children they'd discussed having eventually, the trips they'd planned to take, the growing old together that she'd imagined. She grieves the naive trust she had before all this, the ability to believe someone completely when they make promises. She grieves the version of herself who could fall in love without this protective shield she now carries. She grieves the innocence of thinking that if you're good enough, kind enough, successful enough, beautiful enough, you can prevent betrayal through your own merit. Rebecca has learned that's not how it works. Marcus's choices weren't about her deficiencies. They were about his character. She could have been perfect, and he still would have cheated. She could have done everything differently, and he still would have betrayed her. This wasn't about her not being enough. This was about him being fundamentally broken in ways she couldn't fix and wasn't responsible for fixing. But even on the hard days, the days when grief ambushes her unexpectedly while she's hiking a trail they used to explore together or hearing a song that played at their wedding, Rebecca knows she did the right thing. She knows she honored herself. She knows she refused to be diminished by someone else's cruelty. She knows she chose dignity over convenience, justice over quick resolution, truth over comfortable lies. To anyone watching this who's going through something similar, whether it's infidelity, abuse, betrayal, deception, Rebecca wants them to know something. They are stronger than they think. They deserve better than they're getting. And they have the power to change their situation. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing they ever do. But they deserve a life built on truth rather than lies. They deserve partners who honor them. They deserve to feel safe and valued and loved authentically. Trust yourself. Gather your evidence. Build your case. Find your allies. And when you're ready, stand up and fight for the life you deserve. Rebecca Chen is 39 years old now. She's a senior partner at Morrison & Associates. She found her wedding ring in the trash with a note that said, "Finally free." And what her husband didn't know was that she was already 20 steps ahead of him, building the case that would destroy him completely. Thank you for watching. If you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, please share this story. Subscribe for more stories of justice, courage, and women who refuse to be victims. And remember, you're stronger than you know.